Now that we have the ability to create our Genesis block, let's add the ability to generate new blocks based on the last block that we give it and some given data to store. We'll capture this ability in a new function called MindBlock. This MindBlock function will also be static. So we'll have the static MindBlock function, and this static identifier is so that we don't necessarily need to create a new block instance in order to use this function. The arguments we provide are the last block that it should base its data upon, and then the actual data that we want to store in the block. So first, within this MindBlock function, let's generate a timestamp for this block. So we're going to have a timestamp constant. We'll use the native JavaScript date object. So we'll set it equal to date, which has its own static .now function. So let's call .now. And the now function returns the number of milliseconds that have passed since January 1st, 1970. Second, we'll create a local last hash constant that is assigned to the hash value of the last block that came before it. So that is const last hash, and notice that this one is camel cased, so the H is uppercase. And then we set it equal to the last block dot hash value. Third, let's declare a local hash constant. So for now, we don't have a hash function which generates an encoded value based on the input that we give it. So let's stub it for now and set it to a string that says to-do-hash, which will be a place for us to go back to once we actually create our hash function. Last up, we already have our data with this given parameter for the actual block on what it needs to store. So just like our Genesis block, we can return a new instance of the block itself, and this time load in our generated timestamp, our last hash, the hash value, as well as the data for the last argument. And notice that it's very similar to the return new this in the Genesis block, except this time we're using actual data. Okay, perfect. That wraps up the static MindBlock function. So again, let's go to the dev test file so that way we can explore it. So first up, let's clean up and get rid of our previous tests. So let's get rid of this const block and these console logs. And now let's add a new constant called foo block. So we're going to call this foo block, and guess what we're going to store within this? Well, a string called foo. So we're going to call it block.mindBlock, since that is the new function that we're going to be using, and that's the one we just created. And the question is, well, the first parameter is a last block to give it. Well, right now we don't have any other blocks created since foo block is the first one within our actual file. However, we do have access to the Genesis block, so let's directly call block.genesis, which is the dummy first block provided by our block class. And then now we're going to store the foo string, which is representative of the fact that we're calling this variable foo block. Finally, let's console.log what this block looks like by calling its toString function within the console log. So overall, the file should now have this const foo block, which calls a static MindBlock function and loads in the Genesis block as the first argument, and then uses foo as the stored data, and then we're going to log its toString representation. So now in the command line, you can rerun the dev test, and as you do so, notice that there is a new block printed, and indeed it is the foo block that we created. Notice its data is foo, and great. This shows that we have a successful MindBlock function. Plus it has this unique timestamp now, which is a lot of milliseconds that have passed since over 40, almost 50 years ago. So with that, we also have this hash that says to-do hash. So let's get to generating this unique hash value with a new function that generates the hash next.